But first, last night we revealed the contents of confidential memos produced by 3 government experts which were scathing about the quality of the autopsy of Henry Keogh's fiancée Anna Jane Chaney. The documents surfaced in the Supreme Court last week and refer to former Chief Pathologist Colin Manock's work in the case as incompetent. But no mentions made of these documents in the ultimate board report that was published 12 months ago. This new development adds to what's already a large body of evidence demanding a public review of the case. And as you're about to see, there's more. South Australians have so far been given little cause for confidence in the justice system, especially when there seems to be more interest in damage control than due process for all. Graham Archer has the story.
There should be no hesitation about ordering an investigation.
Do you think there is a need here for an independent review of the Keogh case in particular?
Yes, I think that there are very worrying things in the Keogh case.
I think this is one of several instances that point up perhaps the need for the kind of independent commission of review of criminal cases which exists in the United Kingdom.
What do those opinions effectively cry out for?
Well, they cry out for a review of the case.
Has the possibility of natural causes been properly excluded in what you've seen?
No, it has not. And the answer to that question is no.
I would think that Keogh is not even a marginal case. I think it's a case that cries out, it begs to go back to the court and it begs to go back quickly.
Last night, we revealed how the Medical Board's report on the work of the state's former chief forensic pathologist in the Keogh case failed to mention earlier opinions of incompetence formed by the 3 experts who actually sat on the inquiry.
It's almost frightening to hear words like that in a murder case.
It's certainly a somewhat damning indictment of the system.
The inquiry panel unanimously found Dr Manock's work in the autopsy of Anna Jane Chaney to be acceptable, despite confidential submissions from their own experts claiming it to be lamentably substandard. Ex-Scotland Yard forensic expert Robin Napper.
Totally opposite. The notes are totally opposite to that finding of the Medical Board.
The notes surfaced in court last week when Henry Keogh sought a review of the Medical Board's findings, simply adding to the growing concerns about the handling of his and other cases.
You only need one item of evidence which says it couldn't have happened to prove it didn't happen. You can have infinite amount of evidence to suggest that it did happen, and still it may not have happened.
A look back to when serious concerns were first raised in the Keogh case reveals an alarming picture, starting with the hollow promise from the man who prosecuted Henry Keogh, former DPP Paul Rofe QC.
If there is any credible new evidence, then I'm quite happy to look at it.
And we've heard the same promises from the Attorney-General.
Look, I'm fair man, Bob, and if there is new evidence that was not before the court and would tend to raise a reasonable doubt as to Keogh's conviction, then of course I'm willing to have lawyers look at that.
In fact, there's no shortage of evidence endorsed as new by scores of respected independent experts. Just take as an example the level of the water in the bath in which Keogh was said to have drowned his fiancée. Considering that level, would it have been possible, by the prosecution's theory, to drown a woman like Anna Jane Chaney of that size in that amount of water?
If the head is kept straight facing upwards, certainly not, because the distance from the back of the head to the base of the nose is approximately 20 centimetres.
Dr Manock has since admitted not checking the level and that it may well have changed everything. And then there's the revelation that the so-called thumb bruise, presented to the jury in 2 trials as confirming his theory of murder, lacks any scientific proof.
I think there would be very few, if any, pathologists in Australia who would go to court and say this means the leg was whipped by hand.
Certainly no pathologist who's looked for evidence under the microscope has found proof of a bruise.
The material that, from this specimen that's looked at under the microscope shows minimal, if any, bruising at all.
It's since also been disclosed that neither of the state's pathologists who supported the prosecution case in court could find evidence of the bruise under the microscope either. Not Dr Ross James, nor Dr Manock himself. So he looked at it, thought it might be a bruise, put it under the microscope, couldn't find any scientific evidence of a bruise, but said it was a bruise anyway.
That's correct.
It's crucial information juries in both trials never heard. Surely this alone qualifies as new evidence, especially given Paul Rofe had gone so far as to tell the appeal court those bruises amounted to
the one positive indication of murder, namely the grip mark on the bottom of the leg.
Instead of triggering a review of the case, as these revelations should have, things just got nasty. The first to raise these concerns, pathologist Professor Tony Thomas, was viciously and quite wrongly attacked in Parliament by the Attorney-General Michael Atkinson, the very person whose job it is to ensure the system is accountable.
Well, I think the first thing to say is that if a criticism is made about the messenger rather than the message, that's always a little worrying.
And it didn't stop at that. Professor Thomas's attempts to defend himself were met with threats of a further smear campaign by the Attorney-General, with the aid of others hoping to keep a lid on this Pandora's box.
My view, and I said it at the trial, is that I don't think this case would have got to court in Victoria.
Despite the treatment of Professor Thomas, the number of eminent legal and medical experts who disputed Manock's murder scenario continued to grow.
But what you've got in Keogh now is some very, very well-credentialed expert evidence which casts enormous doubt on the very fundamentals that convicted Keogh. And in my view, that is the sort of case, it's the archetypal case to go back before the court.
Even so, the damage control continued. Next to involve himself was the current chief forensic pathologist, Roger Byard, who launched into research which appears intended to prop up yet another of Dr Manock's bogus claims in the Keogh case. This time, his theory for proving death by drowning.
Well, in my experience, it is not.
Professor Rex Ferris, an internationally respected pathologist, says almost no expert in the world would support Dr Manock's idea because the evidence he used, staining of the aorta by the breakdown of blood cells, can have many causes aside from drowning.
The commonest reason for red cells to break down is because of decomposition. And the autopsy was not performed for, I believe, over 36 hours after this woman's death. And so you could not interpret that as being evidence of drowning. I'm not sure that it is ever evidence of drowning.
It seems the attempt to paper over the cracks has spread from politics to our public servants.
Our system, instead of serving the public, has begun to serve itself and has become distant from the public and their needs, and we need to correct that.
It's an indication of just what deep-seated problems in the system lie behind the Keogh case. After all, those confidential memos from the medical board didn't stop with criticisms of Dr Manock, but the performance of our entire forensic science service for decades.
I cannot determine whether the apparently unsatisfactory nature of the service was due mainly to poor funding, poor support and staffing levels, or can be laid firmly at Dr Manock's feet as an indication of his incompetence or failure in management and direction.
These flaws, raised many times before and seemingly confirmed by the new documents, and which could affect any family in the state, have been met so far with nothing but smokescreens and stalling from the government.
There is now enormous media and public concern about the state of our legal system, such as with the Nima case, the Keogh case, Wards of the State, the Eugene McGee case, and now we have seen the...
And when Premier Mike Rann was put on the spot, the best he could offer was this.
I can announce to the House today that I understand that the Solicitor General is currently looking into aspects of the Keogh case.
Just another brush-off. At the time of the Premier's so-called announcement, the Solicitor-General already had Keogh's petition for a review on his desk for over 2 years, without making a decision. It's now been well over 3 years, and it's a case of justice delayed, which has left his more distinguished legal colleagues elsewhere mystified.
Given the evidence of the lack of proper credentials of the pathologist and the uncertainty about his scientific approach, I would have thought that that could have been dealt with in a matter of 3 months. There's nothing very complex about the situation.
The opposition's new shadow AG and Justice Minister, Isabel Redmond, doesn't seem to have much of a clue about the proper duties of her office either, responding to a recent request to consider concerns about the case with,
"I wish to advise you that I remain convinced of Henry Keogh's guilt and do not intend to spend any time whatsoever in answering correspondence henceforth."
Sadly, this reflects the culture that's paralysed this state, that politicians and public servants appear to think they hold the positions they do to serve their own views and not always the proper duties of office. What we've shown you is only a fraction of the extraordinary twists and turns in this case. Fortunately, those medical board memos should provide the new evidence needed for Keogh's lawyers to bypass politics and ask the Chief Justice, John Doyle, to provide a proper judicial review, though something even bigger is clearly called for.
Personally, I think it cries out for a complete independent case review, but from people outside the state. People who are known experts in their fields, investigators, pathologists, forensic medical people, so that the people of South Australia can have some confidence that the system's got it right.
Graham Archer reporting there, and after the break, forklift face-off, the Adelaide workers' feud that finally went too far.